Hello, everyone. Today is an honor to present some speakers that they are experts in e-government and public policy. So, is Erika Piirmets with us, Héctor Cardenas, and Leonardo Alvarez. And Leonardo Alvarez is helping us to moderate this panel.
Hello, everybody, and it's a great pleasure to be with you all. I think we have a very interesting discussion today because we have two leading experts in the field of e-government. We have Erika Piirmets from Estonia, and Estonia is the leading country in terms of digitization, and she's been working on this for quite a long time. She's worked abroad, and then she's been part of the digital transformation strategy on Estonia as a transformation advisor. And well, all her work is devoted to supporting the spread of digitization and the improvement of government services in Estonia. And we also have Héctor Cardenas. He is a lecturer in the Goldman School of Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley, and he is also the CEO of the Ergo Group, a consulting company that works on e-government. And he has worked on North America, especially in some states in Canada, in the federal government in Mexico, and in state governments in the US. So now that we have them here, we have a very interesting agenda. And let's start with Erika and what's been done in Estonia. We have all these accounts of what's happening in Estonia, but I imagine not everybody is quite familiar. Is it true that all the government services are digitized, that you don't have to use paper documents, that you don't have to be present to do things? How far has this gone in Estonia, and what have been the results of this experience for Estonian people?
Yes, really happy to share a bit more. I would start from our historical background that after 50 years of Soviet occupation, Estonia restored its independence in 1991. As it was a very happy event, we were now facing the struggles of building up a completely new country with no currency, law, or governmental processes, and no money to construct them. So it is often said that Estonia decided to go digital when internet boom really hit off. The truth is, we really did not have a choice. You see, Estonia is a very sparsely populated country, and our remote villages consist of three households with 3 kilometers apart from each other. So, keeping this in mind, it is really hard to reach all the population physically. So, digitalization was essential to bring the state closer to its citizens. It is correct that 99% of the public services are accessible online. However, no one is forced to use the digital way. There are still possibilities for the classical paper forms to be used. It's just that it often saves time and money to consume e-services instead. And as far as interactions go, people are still meeting face to face, just less with civil servants and more with their close ones. And when I say 99% of the services have been digitalized, it's only the number of public services, but there are many private e-services that are accessible as well, such as banking or telecommunication, shopping, etc. And one big benefit from digitalization is undoubtedly the save of time. Statistics show 5 full days per year for the citizen and thousands of working hours for the civil servant is saved. And in addition, of course, the economical gain, 2% of our GDP is saved annually thanks to the use of digital signature. Also, there are many, I would say, hidden parts in digitalization, and we are currently advanced society with the standard of living having risen massively since the Soviet times. And we cannot be sure if we would be the same economically and socially good position without the digitalization implemented in the society in the early 90s. So I would say that there are several gains that we have gotten thanks to the digital society.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the scope? Because it's hard to imagine from some other places what kind of things you are doing online. What happens when a child borns, or you go to school, or you go to a medical service, public medical service? How, or a new enterprise is born? How does this work in this digital work in Estonia?
So the basis of all the digital society is actually our electronic identity.
Okay.
And this is really the backbone, because if we can safely authenticate ourselves online, then this is like the groundworks of where the digital society can be born up to. The next part, of course, is to gather all the essential data about the citizen so that you could build the e-services and to make them available. And there is a very easy but really functional software layer that is called the X-Road, that interconnects all the collected data about the citizen so that we could easily consume the e-services. So, and because we have once only principle implemented in the society, that means that a government entity can ask my data only once, and it has to be stored in the database correspondingly. So, for example, a population registry cannot have my health information, for example. Only the health registry can hold my health information. And in case I need to consume an e-service where my health records are needed, the X-Road brings the different parts of the collected data together, enabling me to use all the services online. And as I mentioned before, that when we started to make all the governmental processes physically, they also had to be born online as well. So we implemented them at the same time.
Well, that's really very, very, very impressive. You've gone ahead of all the world, literally, in terms of thinking how to interact with citizens. This part of digital identity is part of what we're trying to achieve in other parts of the world in usual interactions. And this respect on having each part of the information of the citizens in a special compartment where only the citizen can use it when it's necessary for the purposes that are necessary is a very important principle. And those are lessons that are going to be very helpful for all the audience and for all people that are trying to work on that. Thank you very much, Erika. We'll ask you a little bit more on how you did how you achieved this in a few minutes. But let's hear from Hector. What has happened in North America? Hector has worked in different places. What are the things that you think had been successful in this as part of the hemisphere, either at federal, local, or state levels? What has been done?
Well, thank you very much to all of you for this opportunity to talk to you about this really important topic. So, I mean, North America is a very big place, of course, and there's a lot of very different initiatives that have happened over the years. I think the most important, the most groundbreaking thing that happened in North America, of course, was the creation and expansion of the backbone for all of this, which is the internet. And the capacity to do the kinds of things that Estonia is doing is you know, the fundamental basis that's required is wide accessibility of connectivity to everybody. And so I think that's one of the most important trends that we've seen that have allowed for this kind of modernization and digitalization to happen. Now, beyond that, we've seen you know, steps forward in various areas in North America. It hasn't been as extensive as what we've seen in Estonia, but as Erika mentioned, Estonia is a small country, sparsely populated, and some of the challenges that come with trying to create digital services begin with the identification of the person. And that's something I think that Estonia has done very well, and it's been a major headache in other parts of the world, including North America. If you look at Mexico, Canada, the United States, all three countries, for different reasons, have had a very hard time creating that clear and unassailable identification for everybody. Mexico, as we know, it's been a very, very difficult process to create a single database and also to protect the data. And so I think there's been a lot of difficulties in getting people to sign up for digital IDs. The Mexican Ministry of Finance, for example, has come up with a digital signature. But because they're so worried about the access to that information, about the security of the information, they've made it into a very onerous process to have a digital ID. So it's sort of an interesting contrast between the way that Estonia did it and the way that Mexico did it. Mexico did it by creating very complicated ways of becoming a digital citizen, right? You have to go physically to get a certificate, then you have to load the certificate on your computer, then you have to do another 3 steps to get your e-signature, and you always have to keep that certificate around you. So it's very complex. Most people can't do it properly. So that's been the Mexican example. The US example has been quite different. The US is a country with a legal system that is based on responsibility and litigation. And so basically there, and because there's also very strong First Amendment and other procedural rights, there has not been any kind of effort to create a single national identification model. What we see instead are various levels of identification. So everything from what we see through Social Security numbers and tax records and also credit rating companies. So there's there's an intermix of private and public actors who create the identification of individuals, right? So it's a very complex mishmash of ways in which you identify yourself online. And private companies have taken a lead in helping citizens to become digital citizens by doing IDs through Facebook, through Google, right, through their Social Security number and their tax records and so on and so forth. So it's a very different set of challenges that we've seen in at least these two countries. I say this just to give you a sense of how complex all of this framework is. Now, once you get through that, we have been able to expand the availability and the number of digital services in government quite substantially. In the United States, a lot of the major things that people have to do can be done online, from filing your taxes through, again, the intermediation of an entire, very, very large, I think over $20 billion a year tax preparation industry that has really taken advantage of this and produced all of these goods. So it doesn't come without a cost, right? But it allows people to be able to interact, for example, for their tax. I'm thinking of these because I just did my taxes just a couple of days ago, all online, right? Fairly simple, even though disappointing. But anyway, you can do those things. You can work a lot on local governments in the United States with very different levels. So, not necessarily where you would expect them. It's not, for example, California, which is the home of the Silicon Valley, the home of digitalization, is not a particularly digitized state as far as state services are concerned. There are other states that have gone a lot further in this route. States that have smaller populations, states also that have dispersion of communities in their territory. So not so different from Estonia, right? So states like that have actually advanced a lot more than the bigger states like New York or California. And then you go even lower, at a lower level, at the city level. And at the city level, there's a lot of innovation in using digital services. There's a whole initiative around smart cities that has been having a lot of effect in the United States. Whether it's San Francisco with a host of online services to people, everything from parking to certainly to permitting and construction permitting and all of those kinds of services. So it's a very vast patchwork, I would say, of efforts and successes and failures also in digitalization. And it's not always where you would expect the most progress to have been made, where there has been the most progress. Certainly, it sort of underlies the exceptional story of Estonia.
That's very interesting contribution, Hector, because we can compare these two worlds, and maybe the technology is not the key or is not the different part, but how we approach these things. And in Estonia, they have this unified system that makes everything interoperable. And in North America, we have a lot of different efforts, and some of them are very large, like the ones that for filing your income taxes, whether in the United States or in Mexico, that work very well, and they are national and they're broad and they are working, and you have a registration of a lot of people. But once you get to the different levels of government or the different parts of government, not everything is the same thing. It's a very complex situation. Perhaps there are some political parts, there are technical issues also, but it's an interesting contrast, which put us on the thing on the complexities of government itself in order to be digitized. Well, let's think about these complexities a little bit and understand about these experiences, how that they have been working. Erika, how did you guys achieve this transformation? What were the first steps? How did you proceed from your first steps? And what did you do? What was the basic start of this strategy?
Yes, well, I believe that there was more or less a political consensus about taking the digitalization route in the small round of the decision makers in this time, because there simply weren't many alternatives back in the day to build the country with the resources available. The first step was the creation of the mandatory electronic identity that all the infrastructure of e-services is built upon. And I completely agree here with Hector that this is essential, and it has to be simple and accessible and really understandable for the end user, because when we are building businesses, we are always looking to cater the needs of the end user, our client who is buying the service. So in e-governance, the emphasis should go the same way. Our end user is our citizen. So whatever we do needs to facilitate the end user, our citizen, to gain the maximum benefit. And really, if we take, for example, our neighbors in Finland, they have very identical system to what Estonia implemented also. They have the ID card, they have the authentication methods, they have the secure digital identity, they are making some of the services also online, but people are not using this. And why? Because their ID card, the digital identity, is not mandatory. And Estonia made a really strategical decision from the beginning to make this mandatory for all the citizens. Because if you are developing all these expensive e-services and no one is going to use them, then this is just a waste of money. So the electronic identity that everybody holds is the first step, is the key in my opinion.
Well, that's a great comment and a great insight. What were the main obstacles to achieve this? Because it's not a small thing to get this identity, electronic identity. Were the challenges technological, economical, organizational, political?
Well, yes, when you have the electronic identity in place, you proceed step by step. This is how you build up the digital society. Estonia had the unique possibility of constructing the whole country from zero, basically. And while implementing governmental processes, they were also made available online. This gradual development, digitalization, and the collection of data has led us to the present, where Estonia has 99% of the public services online. This is not achieved overnight. Of course, this is a gradual process, but the decision, the digital-minded leadership has to be before there to make the fundamentals, to set the principles that yes, we're going to go the digital route. And I would argue that the technology is rarely an obstacle, because our digital society was built using the best technology available back then. And nowadays, of course, many of the systems are outdated or carry a complicated legacy architecture, but they are continuously being renewed and modernized. So having the best technology available does not mean that you will have a digital society by default. The bigger obstacle seems to be the lack of this digital-minded leadership that I mentioned, that we see as a reason why some countries are hesitant to digitalize. And really, if you make the processes user-centric and you gain the acceptance from the citizens, and step by step, gradually, this is not overnight dumping a digital society on them and leaving them in a sink or swim situation. This is building up your digital society gradually, introducing new services and making the existing services as citizen-centric as possible.
Well, those are great lessons, and they make me feel quite optimistic about the possibilities of doing something like what happened in Estonia in other countries. But not everybody has the same situation. Perhaps, Hector, you could tell us about the projects that have been successful in this side of the hemisphere. What kind of things were characteristic of those processes? What's the characteristic of the design or implementation of the successful digitization projects, and even the ones you have been part of?
Certainly. So I think first, there's a very important thing that Erika said here, which I think is critical to understanding where you can have success in countries that are very different from Estonia and their historical experience. Estonia was building from scratch, right? That's what Erika's telling us. They had to build something from scratch, and because they were building from scratch and they were building with a vision of an electronic society, they built the government services from the ground up to be digital. This is one of the main obstacles that we have in the rest of the world. When you look at what's been done in Mexico or the United States or Canada, in neither of those cases were we building from scratch. We were building on the basis of government services that already existed and that were designed for the paper world, and were designed also in accordance with the problems that these countries had in the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s. Look at the Social Security card in the United States. It is completely not what is needed for the 21st century, right? But yet it is what we have, because it is a legacy technology from the 1930s, right? And the same thing happens in other places. In Mexico, the government processes are not designed for the digital world. So the first thing, and I think one of the key aspects of when we have had successful digitalization and automation processes, is when governments have recognized that the existing processes are no longer match what is needed in a digital world. And so you don't just digitize a bad process. You change the process first. You recognize that what you have in place is not the right way, and then you can digitize. One very successful example has been in Mexico, for example, with passport issuances. And both Leonardo and I were part of that project a few years ago. And it was a project that began step by step. And before technology was involved, what was involved was careful understanding and re-engineering and redesign of the underlying processes. That's what we had to do. We were dealing with how did you produce passports? It was a completely paper process with typing machines, right? You typed some pieces of information on a piece of paper that then, in the best case, you put a plastic film on top, right? And it was all backed up by paper, right? Old birth certificates crumpled up, right? Photographs taken at the local photo store, and so on and so forth. All of this was completely not the right way to do modern passport issuances. Very difficult to authenticate all these documents. And on top of that, you're doing this in a very large country with a very large population, of which, close to 20 million are abroad. So you had to do it abroad. So it was a very challenging area. And if the Mexican Foreign Ministry hadn't done the work that was necessary to redesign the process, they would not have had the success that they had. In the end, it was very successful because the project allowed the ministry to redesign the process, for example, to integrate databases from Mexico, the civil registry database, where you have the registry of births, with the passport database, so that it was no longer necessary to bring your birth certificate. You could just go to a consulate, say your name, give some basic information. They could look up your birth certificate, authenticate it on the fly, and then issue a passport. And then, of course, the process of issuing a passport became different. And we went from these sort of very old-style paper-based passports to passports that were digitally produced with digital photographs, with iris recognition, and so on and so forth, sort of really modern processes. But again, the most important thing for me wasn't the technology. It was getting the process right. Once you got the process right, the technology wasn't really that expensive to develop. Everything is out there. You just have to source it, right? But you needed to have the vision, and you needed to have the technical understanding of what it is that you wanted to do. So for me, when governments are successful is when they have the right vision, when they are able to get political consensus, either large P political or small P political, the local politics or bigger political issues, when they get the processes right, and then they find the right tools to implement those processes. But without that, the technology isn't going to solve the problem. Sometimes it can make it worse.
Hector, I have a question, because most of the countries, they have their digitization plans, but why then they don't achieve the goal that bring services? Because we see that most of the countries, they are they have a challenge in that field.
Right. Because they're trying to digitize bad processes. Mm-hmm. That's what ends up happening for the most part. They digitize a bad process. And so, there's a famous dictum in modeling: garbage in, garbage out, right? If you have bad information going in, you're going to have bad results. And this is what happens many times when governments decide to digitize. they don't want to spend the time and the money to first redesign. Like Erika was saying, from a user perspective, you need to put the user at the center. Governments many times don't do that. They put themselves at the center, and they design a mechanism that is comfortable for them, that covers their liabilities, that gives them protection, but that doesn't serve the citizen. And you've got to change that. And I think that the really interesting examples where that has changed, the passport example in Mexico is a case. Other cases in the United States where they've put the citizen at the center. There was a really interesting project in New Jersey during COVID to bring COVID services to where they were.
I think we lost Hector.
Yeah, I think. But
well, let me wrap up a little bit what Hector was telling us, because it's really very interesting, the coincidence. Okay, welcome back, Hector.
What happened there that I don't know if I pressed the wrong button or something happened, but I got disconnected. No. But anyway, just finishing the thought. I think there was a very interesting project in New Jersey during COVID where they used a mixture of technology, but also user-centered design to figure out what services were needed and where were they needed. Where was the testing needed? How do you get the testing through that last mile so that it's accessible to people in sufficient quantities and sufficiently easily to make it available? I think that kind of thinking is what makes digital economy and digital society projects successful.
Very, very clear statements from both of you, and there is a strong coincidence on first having the view of digitization clearly is very important, and then to work from the outset in a digital model, which is completely different from the standard bureaucratic procedure. We have to change that, and in order to change that, we have to have the vision, but also we have to put something into the process design that goes differently. It's not working with the same processes that we already have, and this user-centric perspective that you both are telling us is sort of the key of everything. Sometimes the government, how you said it very clearly, Hector, governments have a government-centric perspective to be comfortable, to reduce liability, and that's not going to work at the end. So we have to make these decisions, and these are very hard decisions. And having said that, both of you, I like to hear your thoughts. What would you guys advise to a government that's watching us? Should they start if they are thinking in terms of e-government? Should they do first? Erika.
Yes, thank you. I would say that raising awareness is the key. This is what we do in the eStonia Briefing Center too, raising awareness by telling the story of eStonia and what are the benefits and the learning curves we have experienced in implementing the digital society. Start with educating the population and giving enough and honest information about the different aspects of digitalization and show people the real benefit they can gain through this transformation, because in my honest opinion, digitalization loses its value when it's not citizen-centric and when it's focused on, if it's not focused really on simplifying their own lives. It's just not worth to build technologically impressive modern systems just for bragging. I believe in functionality, and before and during the digitalization process, to be as open and transparent as possible to demonstrate the reliability. And naturally, people have fears connected to the digitalization. What if I lose my job? What if I fail to use these services? What if my data leaks? These are all very reasonable fears that need to be addressed and explained. Estonians were very skeptical about these services as well in the early implementation phase. But once the credibility grew and people could really see the positive benefits from e-services, were they eager to change the attitude and behavior to use more digitized services. And now Estonians are a very demanding crowd. Not only do we want to consume the services, we want the high quality, well developed e-services. Moreover, according to a survey, close to 70% of the whole Estonian population is satisfied with the digital services that the government provides them with. And that is a solid satisfaction rate. And when we talk about policy, then there are noticeable political differences in our society, of course. However, the digital solutions and e-governance are supported by all the parties, regardless of their political views. So I would argue that this is an important key part also, to have all the country's leaders or the political powers on board with the digitalization processes. Because if some authority is always undermining the process that a government tries to sell to the people or to introduce to people, then this creates more fear, more misunderstandings in the society. But your goal, as the goal in, if you are making any transformation in a big organization or business, is to include your members, and therefore you will have less resistance and more availability for them to be part and to try the new ways that you're offering. Nothing can be done by force. If a government has a good idea, let's be very efficient, let's digitalize everything, but forget to include its citizens and inform them how all the processes are going to work, and also not going to help with any courses or any type of support of how to use the new services, then
Excellent.
it's really, really easy to have big resistance.
It seems so excellent advice because it would seem that everything was peachy, very easy in Estonia, and I can see that you had to struggle to get where you are, and that's kind of normal. Is a very big achievement, and that can be encouraging to government officers that are watching us. Hector, what would be your advice to the government officers on how to proceed on this?
Well, if we're thinking about large countries like the ones in North America, I would say the first piece of advice is simplify. Going with what Eric was saying, put the user at the center of things and make things simpler for the user. That's the first thing you got to do. And the second thing is federate. 4 words: government as a platform. I think that's where we have to go. Government should create the platform for all of its services to become digitalized, and then let other levels of government, society, private industry, etc., whoever wants to build on those platforms, use them to create a truly digital society. The best thing that government can do, in my estimation, is to create the basic platform tools. For example, like the identity for all individuals in the country, right? The sign-on, right? The e-sign capability. This idea that Erika mentioned before of I only need to provide things once, right? So create these digital repositories of information that's been validated, and then reuse it as a platform across government and across government levels, so that every time you're doing something with the government, you don't have to go back and show your tax return and show your ID and show your birth certificate and so on and so forth. I think that sort of the platforming of government digital services, I think that's the way to go, and it's the best, the best direction that a complex, complicated, and politically difficult country can, can invest in order to make a headway in this sort of digitization agenda.
Well, I think there are some very clear lessons from where we listen from both of you. I mean, this awareness, this consensus is very important to have all the population, but especially to have a consensus in the political field is important. And then to have a simple model, a very clear model in which you don't construct everything integrated, but you just have a platform. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what both of you are telling us. If you have the platform, everybody can build on that and interact on that, but you have to have the rules for that interaction to happen with certainty, and in which everyone can build things on a secure basis, which is the digital identity in Estonia, and we should have it probably all over the world, not only for government services, but for all kind of e-services. We need digital identity. That's some of the key challenges of society. And talking about those challenges, there are a lot of technologies being developed right now. A lot of things are new. I mean, we have blockchain, we have the metaverse. How are those things impacting on e-governance? What are the trends that we should be thinking about, considering now? Erika, perhaps you want to tell us about.
Yes, very curious that you mentioned blockchain, for example. Blockchain is deployed in our governmental databases already years ago. So this is not a technological innovation for us so much because it's in practical use. Back to your question, I would point out that Estonia's current challenge is to bring the e-governance to a new level with innovative solutions and maintaining the already built infrastructure simultaneously. Estonia has been learning by doing because there are no pioneers in this field who could verify for us that this works and that doesn't. So the new digital agenda is to build new solutions in blocks and not as a monolith, so that innovative changes could be easily implemented. And in case the technology, because technology advances in a rapid pace, and in governance, we are always one or multiple steps behind. So we are just about to implement, for example, virtual assistance network in Estonian governmental services, but iPhone Siri is not a big technological news anymore, but figure that it's only reaching our government systems right now. Another essential part we need to pay attention to in all spheres of life, including e-governance, is the environmental sustainability and the growing technological footprint we are leaving due to the increased use of internet and consumption of the devices with which we connect to internet. Just because the internet is an intangible benefit similar to electricity, we tend to not pay attention to the impact it can have, but we should. If no changes are made, the tendency for 2040 shows that the greenhouse gas emission from the ICT sector could grow above 14%. In my opinion, the future e-governance solutions should strongly focus on having environmental sustainability and climate-friendly solutions as the main principles in developing and choosing the future technology, because I think that we are very close into having very aware users who will demand the sustainable sources also in the digital world. And lastly, I would point out the increasing necessity for cyber protection, because e-governance innovation can only take place in a secure environment. That requires better and comprehensive understanding the global tendencies and the development of the technology. Also, countries need to focus on creating strong cyber defense intelligence within their digital systems, and at the same time be able and willing to contribute to the international crisis management mechanisms. Because as we know, cyber crimes rarely correspond with territorial borders and laws. So these would be the three main principles for me, what we should be focused on when we look to the future.
Excellent, Erika. Thank you very much. Hector, what should we be thinking about in terms of these new trends?
Well, let me say that I agree with everything that Erika said, first of all, and many of the things that she said I would have also underlined. I want to underline perhaps just two things. First of all, the last piece that Erika talked about, which is security. And security has two different aspects. One of that is what Erika was talking about, the security from outside forces, from hackers, from the misuse of information by third parties. That is a very important part of securing the internet, securing public services using the internet. But then there's another aspect of security, which is the security from misuse from within. How do you protect people's rights, the rights to privacy, the right to free speech, etc., when government has an extraordinary amount of information about them? And I think that's another one of the important e-governance issues that we have to deal with in all countries. What are the kinds of measures that we put in place to protect people's information from misuse by the very people who are supposed to help them use it? And at the same time, not create such rigid systems that we cannot reap the benefits of all that information being in one place and being useful, right? Because one of the big tendencies that is coming in government is to use the information that government has, not just for the initial service that it was used for, but to create added value, the same way that private companies are using information to create added value. There's no doubt for me that as an Amazon user, right, I get a lot of value from the way that they use my information. But at the same time, I'm worried that every time I have a conversation around Alexa, they know what I want for lunch, right? But if that's something to worry about with the private sector, it should worry us even more when it's in the hands of the public sector. And so we have to be careful with that piece. The second thing is we have to keep in mind the equity aspects of how we roll out this new world to all of our populations. And by that I mean that we have societies that are very unequal and that have very unequal access to technology, to the internet, to government services, and so forth. And we have to be very careful that we work decidedly towards reducing that digital gap and including everybody in this new digital society. We don't want to have yet another level at which we are separating each other and creating greater inequality. So I think for me, those are the two things that I would add to all the other items that Erika so aptly mentioned.
Well, thank you very much. You've been very helpful in this. There's always the temptation to think on what is new, like the newest trend is going to be the most helpful, and we could imagine these virtual settings with a robot taking care of us, yeah, and sitting in there and having all sort of special experiences. But there are some more basic things to be taken care of when we're dealing with government services, and security is certainly the core of everything that we do online. And we have to think in this security in a way in which is not only defensive, but in terms of building strategies for those government services to be reliable and to be capable, redundant, and to be capable of not being destroyed or not having the information taken out. And that's a matter of design on the way we think. We have to think on those blocks on how the government works, that it's easy to put things together. So that's the way you actually get more and more services and better services. And we have to surely make sure that all those services we're doing are based on the idea of creating value for society. Otherwise, we're just talking about our vanity, and that's going to cost a lot of money, and is not going to end being successful at the end for citizens and for governments themselves. So thank you very much for your very valuable advice. I don't see Guillermo around here, but I thank everybody for being present in this conference. I'm personally going to watch it over and over again. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from this experience. Thank you very much. Guillermo?
Thank you very much, Héctor. Thank you very much, Erika. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been an honor to have this talk with you.